with the extremes of a looming threat. And I just want to mention it before I get into my program. I've just recently come back from Italy and I visited an area around the Bay of Naples. And for those of you who know, there's a little peninsula that sticks out towards the southern part of Italy. One side is the Amalfi Coast, the other is the Bay of Naples. And we arrived in Naples, and there's about a 60-kilometre journey till you get to Sorrento. It is the most beautiful, stunning scenery that you've ever seen. And it is where 2,000 years ago Pompeii and Herculaneum was built because of this spectacular scenery. Now, the reason I bring it up now, after just listening to Bickham as a looming threat, is what can happen. And basically, I was so shocked by what I saw on that 60-kilometre journey, because what I saw was just nothing but slums. People living in slums with no care. There was no pride of place. There was just nothing. There was graffiti over every space. There was rubbish in the streets piled high. And I couldn't believe it, with this stunning scenery, why people had no pride of place. And after asking quite a few people why, the reason came back to me was because everything is built under Mount Vesuvius and the threat of eruption. And again, of it happening again, and nobody cared. So there was a certain pride of place in that their families had lived there for the last 2,000 years, but there was no pride of place of what we heard earlier with Peter Carlin, of wanting to restore anything old. They were, of course, restoring parts of Pompeii as a tourist attraction, but it was just such a shock to me with such beautiful scenery, and listening to Peter Hagen talk about Bickham and the threat of Bickham, and why there are some some things that aren't just going ahead in this area because of the threat of Bickham. And when I saw that in the extreme of what can happen with a threat, I just hope to God it doesn't happen to this beautiful area. So I'm just getting on to something a little more frivolous, actually. And I look forward to, I'm going to stick to my script because I do tend to ramble if I don't have a script. I look forward to sharing some historical facts and stories of Murrurundi that I've mentioned on the weekly community ABC radio segment, A Peek in the Past. The ABC local radio has a What's On in the Community segment every week for each town, and for the past year or so I've been reporting the community activities of our very busy little town here. One day I mentioned the history of an event, and it sort of kind of stuck, leading to a Peek in the Past segment every week. Each week I research both historical facts and stories in the Miranda area, or landmarks and special places to visit. Often it starts with an old newspaper article. A lot of the time I find amusing stories to read from the early days when Miranda was first settled, when the newspaper reported on just about everything, in language that tickles the tongue and without thought to any political correctness or censorship. So I would love to share with you some of the highlights from the Peek in the Past. The Miranda area has been my home for 30 years, and I would like to convey to you, through my travels in Mirundi's history, my very strong sense of pride of place in this beautiful part of Australia. I'd like to start with the meaning of the word Murrurundi, which is derived from an Aboriginal word. There are a number of variations as to what the word means. 5 fingers, which refers to a very unusual rock formation that is visible from the town. Nest in the valley, nestling in the valley, place where the nest sits. I'd like to refer to an article that I found in the Illustrated Sydney News from 1892. The name Murrurundi should sound at first merely bizarre and hopelessly incongruous, as it does to one unused to the rolling R's and globose vowels of Aboriginal speech, and your tongue should stumble in the attempt to pronounce it. Let me request you to pause before you make your second onslaught on the awkward syllables, for the name once translated and the locality described, it is redolent of poetry. A nest in the hills. That is what the Aboriginal landlords meant by the troublesome word, and a Royal Commission or subcommittee of the Associated Antiquaries could not have named it more aptly. So, food for thought. One of my first tasks was to compare the census of of 1891 to the census of 2006 for the population of Murrurundi and how it compared to our neighbouring towns. In 1891, Miranda had the largest population compared to Scone, Murrurundi and Denman, with 1,254 people. In 2006, Miranda had the smallest population compared with its neighbours, with 804 people. The biggest percentage in growth over the 115-year period had come from Denman, followed by Scone and then Murrurundi. Miranda had a decrease in population growth of 36%. One of our most colourful residents of past was that of bushranger Ben Hall, who spent his early years between the ages of 5 and 15 years living with his family in Murrurundi. His parents were the first people to purchase a private building block in a subdivision of land called the Commodore Block, owned by Thomas Hayden in 1842, which was later known as Haydenton. Miranda was also famous for the story of the Jew Boy gang of the bushrangers who were eventually tracked and captured with a dramatic shootout at Doughboy Hollow just north of the town in 1863. The story of Peter Clark, who was robbed and murdered by a bushranger near Miranda at Warlands Range, was a story repeated many times and turned into ballads and poems. A monument was erected to his name and stands proudly to this day at Warlands Range. In 1869, there was great excitement in Murrurundi when fossil remains of the Diprotodon, a giant or rhinoceros wombat, was found on a property near town. A Diprotodon was the largest marsupial to have ever lived, and that was about 1.6 million years ago until about 40,000 years ago when it became extinct. In 1926, just south of Murrurundi at Murrulla, was the scene of one of the most tragic and horrific rail disasters in New South Wales history, where 26 people lost their lives. Just 2 months before, in the July of 1926, was the Ardglen Tunnel disaster just north of Murrurundi, where the fireman of a goods train was killed and the driver injured when they became overcome by fumes in the tunnel and lost control of the engine and crashed. Quite a few trains had overrun the station beyond the tunnel due to the driver losing consciousness because they had been overcome by these fumes. Many passengers also lost consciousness until engineers were sent in and the ventilation problems were solved. In an article from 1879, I read about 2 caves that had been discovered at Timor, east of Murrurundi. More than 80 caves have since been discovered and are known collectively as the Timor Caves. The caves are approximately 73.5 million years old. In 2011, bone deposits of what is believed to be the remains of Australia's megafauna have been found in these caves. In an article dated 1869, I found references to an area near Timor where an abundance of silver and lead had been discovered. The area was mined for a number of years, but it was a logistical nightmare and proved too costly to continue. The shale mine at Murrurundi was a very important part of Murrundi's history. The first reference I could find about the shale mine was an article in 1872 when it was discovered on a property called Collie Creek, which was part of Mount T mine at that time, just north of Miranda. It was found in abundance and mined briefly for kerosene oil around that time. The mine then lay dormant until 1911 when the shale was mined in earnest. Mirundi's population boomed for these few years until the mine closed for good in 1914 due to the First World War. I have made mention of some landmarks in the program that are unique to the Murrurundi area, and of course one was Burning Mountain and the Windjin Maid and the Aboriginal stories behind these particular landmarks. And one is also of Wallabadar Rock, which is found just east of Murrurundi, which by some reference is claimed to be the second largest monolith in the southern hemisphere. Whether or not that this is the case, it is a remarkable looking rock jutting 1,000 feet straight out of the ground and covering 140 acres. It is defined as a quartz rhyolite and referred to as a volcanic plug from lava that has been solidified. An interesting fact that few people may not know was that in 1932, a committee was formed in Murrurundi to organise a 2-day Bushman's Carnival that was subsequently held on the 11th, 12th, 13th and 14th of November in 1932. This carnival laid the foundations for the following years and a set of rules was drawn up called the Murrurundi Bushmen's Carnival and Show Association rules. And in 1933, these rules were adopted by the Australian Bushmen's Carnival and used for all carnivals Australia-wide, including the RAS Sydney camp drafting and rough riding events. Some of my research leads me to some wonderful stories that happened in Miranda, and one of my favourite was when Worth's Circus came to town on a memorable evening in 1910. The whole circus arrived by train, and the elephants were used to help unload the cages from the train and to take them down to the showground. On this evening, the lion tamer was in the iron cage during his show when 3 lions escaped through an unlocked door of the cage into the circus tent. And the newspaper article screamed, "Sensation at Murrurundi, an exciting hunt, some narrow escapes." The lions ran through the tent and the performers were forced to shimmy the tent poles to get out of their way. A pony wasn't so lucky and was mauled by the lions. The audience, by some miracle, kept their seats while the lions took off into the night and into the main street of Murrurundi. For the next few hours, the lions roamed the streets and backyards of Murrurundi, causing havoc in many chook pens and mauling another horse at the White Hart Hotel. 2 of the lions were captured fairly quickly, but 1 lioness remained at large until the early hours of the morning, when she was eventually captured near Blandford while eating a cow. My reading brings me into contact with a Dr. Gordon more than anyone else in Miranda. He lived in town for nearly 30 years, from the late 1850s to the early 1880s. He practiced as a GP and surgeon and was highly regarded and respected and was very much the man around town. He was very active in the community, and he and his wife held many parties and balls. He was an amateur taxidermist, and he had a quirky habit of dropping stone fruit seeds as he was driving out to see his patients, especially over the Liverpool plains, where maybe the fruits of his labour still flourish in places, excuse the pun. My favourite medical story of his was that he claimed to have never lost a patient to a snake bite in his 30 years if he was able to administer his snake bite remedy in good time. His remedy was to inject ammonia or strychnine directly into the vein of a patient after giving them a pint of neat whiskey first. If the patient was unable to drink the whiskey, it was mixed with milk and injected into the anus. This remedy was common at the time in country areas of Australia until antivenin was discovered in the 1890s in Paris. Dr. Gordon was a colourful character and claimed he was heir to a baronet, but renounced his claim when he refused to follow his father's footsteps into the church because he wanted to become a doctor, which was looked down upon in those days. People in Miranda were always very sceptical of this claim. Whatever the case, in 1882 he packed up and left Miranda after some unfavourable rumours and debt problems. In the last month, Barb Riddle has received an intriguing email by Dr. Gordon's great-great-granddaughter questioning Dr. Gordon's doctor credentials, and that it looks like he wasn't even born a Gordon, and that had in fact been transported to Australia in 1852 for trying to pass off a forged cheque and was sentenced to 11 years. His sentence was reduced to 2 years after he saved a little girl's life. In my travels through the newspapers of 2 centuries ago, I find some amusing letters and stories that have been published, and here are a couple that I've singled out. The first is a letter written in the Maitland Mercury in 1868 by a German who has come to Miranda because of the promise of work. Now you've got to listen carefully to this, and I hope I can read it because it's very small writing. Mr. Editor, I am one German, and I come to Miranda because your papers say men get plenty work there. I very easy find out Miranda, but I no find out work, so your correspondent do very bad by putting such things in the papers. As I get no work, I go and sell cucumbers, and I see very much of the town. The people say they all make fortunes when the railway comes to town. I believe so, as they're very smart for business, and the railway bring more smart dealers here. I do well also, at the cucumbers, and I open a colonial wine shop and get Mr. Parks to change the law and allow mine customers to drink wine in mine own shop and house and not be fined. That law sell plenty colonial, same as Germany. Rum have no chance then. I go very much among the farmers for cucumbers, but the farmers, very lazy here, no grow nothing but wheat and idle half the year. German make best farmer, always working and selling fruit, colonial wine, potatoes and cucumbers. And very good subject to Queen Victoria. Policemen here very good indeed. They catch 3 thunderbolts in 1 week and put them in the lockup. The bushrangers very drunk indeed. Plenty magistrates, plenty lawyers, and plenty everything here, but me no see the barbers, fiddlers, wood dealers, charwoman, and Pie Man, your correspondent, wanted to come here. If they do, they may go and sell cucumbers. When I get the wine shop, I also sell the Mercury and send you plenty news, all very true, as I did in Fatherland. And I learned to speak the English very good and spell very fast. I call at the tavern and get 1 glass of brandy. I get a little drop and no strong in a tumbler with very big bottom. I then say, this is 1/2 glass. And the innkeeper then say, I don't want to make you drunk. I then sell him 6 cucumber and he pay me. I give him 3 cucumbers. He then felt very wild and say, I pay for 6. I say, I don't want to make you sick. And he give him know that he sells his brandy that way. He then say, brandy is not like cucumbers. Me then tell him, I know that, as you cannot mix cucumbers or give little measure. In Germany, you get good quality and good measure. I buy loaf here and beef cheap, but mine old woman say that other thing very dear. You put this letter in your paper and you'll have all true news, and the German be pleased to buy your paper. Now the second one is a letter that was one of Barb Riddle's favourites, that was written in the Maitland Mercury in 1857 to try and get a bridge erected between the towns of Murrurundi and Hayderton across the Page River, and this was the way it was done back then. To the editors of the Maitland Mercury on the 16th of April 1857. Gentlemen, I am a forgotten swain, and I have got to thank the listless, spiritualist, apathetic, put up with anything denizens of the Page for it. The townships of Murrurundi and Hayderton are separated by the River Page, which when swollen comes down in a perfect avalanche. I was about the hymeneal altar. Everything was prepared, and in 2 days I was about to have been the happiest of men. But the course of true love never did run smooth, not for the Page either. The sky had assumed a portentous and lowering aspect as if to forbid the bounds. Still I was indulging in fancied security, although the thunder boomed in the mountains. The eventful day had arrived. I donned my holiday rig and proceeded to the abode of my lady love in Hayderton, but alas, the river was up and it would have been madness to cross. So we had to return as we came and wait patiently until the freshet abated. I heard nothing of my lovely Suki for several days, and when the river had become passable, the bird had flown with another mate and left me to deplore her loss and lament the all-absorbing sleepy headiness of the residents of the district in not making application at the proper quarter for the erection of a bridge over the crossing place between 2 flourishing townships of Murrurundi and Hayderton. I am Shellback. The third is an extract for a wanted ad, which I found very amusing. Wanted, a working superintendent for all classes of stock, man, bird, beast and fish. He must be of sober and industrious habits, given neither to grog, tobacco, lying, cursing, swearing, his moral habits A1. To be able to live a flea to a flunky, to be able to plant, prune or bud any sort of tree or plant, as well as build up or pull down, dig, mow, sow, plough, milk, clean stables or pigsties, cut and draw firewood, a good hand to drive a team of bullocks, wheel a barrow to driving a coach. In fact, he must have a knowledge of everything required for the good management of a station. What he does not know and willing to learn will be taught him for a consideration. He must be a good penman as well as bookkeeper. So much the better if he can get up at cock crow, he can lay down when the hens go to roost. One thing he must not do, make love to the women, maids or black gins without permission from his master. Wages to commence with £60 per annum. I did the above for over 9 years, for growls, curses and kicks. Apply to W.M. Ross. Now, I'm just going to end with an article that I found on the 6th, it was written on the 6th of May, 1869, and I think it describes Murrurundi to this day so eloquently, and I don't think anybody could describe it again as well. And it starts like this. Those of our readers who have not visited the town of Murrurundi at the foot of the Great Dividing Range have a pleasure to come, which many will doubtless proceed to enjoy when railway communication shall have advanced so far into the interior. The scenery surrounding the town is the most picturesque mountain scenery that can be well imagined, but it is more than picturesque, it is grand in the highest degree. The town itself is built in a valley which widens considerably on either side of the road towards Scone and is studded with fertile farms producing sufficient wheat in ordinary seasons for all requirements. Above the town, the valley pierces into the mountains, and from one point of view obtained from the travellers as the traveller passes up the range, discloses a landscape of extraordinary beauty, so strange as it is to see amid the rugged environs on either side, of glowing greenness of a cultivated field and the trim arrangement of the fruit trees of an orchard, and to contrast them with the free, broad, unconfined and mighty productions of nature. There are many very neat buildings in the town, which is far more compact in its arrangement than most country towns are in the early stages of their development. This results from the desire of residents to front the Great Northern Road, and also from the limited area upon which space is afforded for buildings at all. Many of the buildings are of stone, which imparts to the whole place a clean and refreshing appearance. But it is the situation of the place that commands admiration. The tops of hills are always in winter covered with snow, and thus a new element of beauty is added to what is already beautiful. We had the opportunity during a recent visit to view the valley from the most favourable point, if one point can be said to be more favourable than another amid such scenery, namely from the gap, whence, looking downward, you behold below the enclosing ranges, the quiet town and valley, the brown road stretching through it, the gleaming fields beyond, and then, rising like mighty waves, an endless succession of hills, gradually becoming indistinguishable by distance and melting in a blue haze till they merge into the illimitable azure of the heavens. The air of the place is healthy and invigorating, and a visit of a few weeks would do more to set up a patient, if he could take any exercise, than much unpalatable doctor's stuff. And doubtless, when it is more accessible, Murrurundi will be a favourite resort for the hapless ones who struggle with disease. The journey, even under the present disabilities of travelling, is a pleasant one enough in the daytime, and the scenery on the road is only surpassed by the perfection of the view that awaits the wayfarer at his journey's end. We recommend a jaunt to this beautiful little town to all who can appreciate nature in her loveliest aspects, and are sure that our praises will not be deemed fulsome when we say that a Scotch gentleman did not hesitate to admit to us that the scenery about it resembled that of his native country. The force of approval can no farther go. And so we close this article. So thank you.